Welcome back. We are on our second last session for the afternoon, our second day of gridXdays, and this is a session that I've definitely been looking forward to. We're talking about if we can reach 100% renewable energy and if that should be our goal. So it's fairly unanimous that, we want a clean energy system. I don't think anyone is really doubting that these days, hopefully, and we want to reach carbon neutrality. But is 100% feasible? The share of renewable energy in gross final energy consumption in the EU last year was 22%. The newly proposed 23 target is 40%. So we have a long way to go. Should this be our goal? How can we get there? How can we deal with seasonality and intermittency? That's what we're going to be discussing for the next hour. And to do that, I have in the studio with me here, Christoph Strasser. After working as an associate at the corporate and investment bank JP Morgan, Christoph became the co-CEO of Pacifico Renewables Yield AG, which recently became Tion Renewables AG. And Tion operates a European portfolio of wind and solar farms with an installed capacity of 159 megawatts, holds a stake in European independent power producer Clearvise AG, and has priority access to a pipeline of over 5 gigawatts of photovoltaic and battery storage projects. Thank you so much for being here in the studio with me today, Christoph.
Thanks for having me. A pleasure.
Great. So we also have Lisa Strippchen, and after gaining experience at NATO and Trienal, Lisa started working for the Deutsche Energieagentur, DENA, or the German Energy Agency. DENA is Germany's Centre of Expertise for Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy Sources, and Intelligent Energy Systems. The think tank contributes to the attainment of energy and climate policy objectives. At the beginning of the year, Lisa started in a new unit called the Unit for Strategy and Policy. Their main focus is national energy policy, especially the expansion of renewable energy sources and energy security. Lisa, welcome to the panel.
Thanks.
Joining her, we also have Steffen Schülzchen, who founded Entrix in 2021. Entrix acts as a route to market for grid-scale battery storage, currently focusing on the UK and Germany. The intelligence of Entrix's trading and optimization platform unlocks the full value of flexible assets and thereby enables the energy transition. Entrix uses AI-based algorithms to maximize returns over the asset's lifetime. The flexibility of grid-scale battery storage is traded across all relevant markets in real time. They're also working on the optimization of entire distributed energy asset portfolios. Steffen, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Good to hear. And we have Jochen Schwill, founder of the German digital utility Next Kraftwerke and CEO for 13 years. Recently announced he will be leaving the company for a break. Passionate about renewable energies, energy markets, and digitalization, Jochen is working for the Energiewende and loving it. Jochen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for being with you.
And finally, we have Jean-Baptiste Cornerfert, VP of Digital Innovation and Low Carbon Solutions at BP. His roles include developing and driving renewable, digital and customer-centric solutions. And this involves leading BP battery initiatives, developing integrated energy systems at scale, shaping customer solutions, and acting as a board member for IEA Digital Wind Energy. Before that, he worked as the managing director and CIO of Sonnen, the director of virtual power plants and renewable marketing business unit at E.ON, and in various roles at Uniper. Jean-Baptiste, thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, and glad to see the unknown faces for this panel discussion today.
Me too. So let's just dive straight into the questions. Jean-Baptiste, should 100% renewable energy be the goal?
Absolutely. And I think we could keep the answer this short. Yeah. I think if we want to go a little bit more into the details, I think it's more the question about the timing and the urgency, and the recognition that different countries will probably follow slightly different pathway. I think the basis, and it's quite clear, is going to be let's say, wind and PV, wind onshore, wind offshore, and the addition of battery, of demand side management. This is going to be happening everywhere. And then you might need to close some gaps, and then it will depend on what are the available options, so to say. So it can be, if you're in Iceland or in Norwegian, then hydro is probably a good solution. Yeah, but it might not work everywhere. You can have long duration energy storage. The full picture is not there yet, but there is a large number of initiatives in this way. Yeah? Or, hydrogen will definitely play a role in some specific use cases also. Yeah? So I think the first part is sector coupling and electrification wherever it works, and then you close the gaps, yeah, and as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned long duration storage there, Stefan. How can that help us resolve the pretty big issues of seasonality and intermittency?
Yeah, that's obviously a good point. I think let's maybe differentiate between two different kinds of storage. The one part is the way that we take care of the things that are happening within a day or between the days. I think for this, that's what we are working with at Entrix. Batteries can actually play a major role. And I think on the seasonality, Jean-Baptiste already mentioned it a bit. I think here we have to look into different kinds of technologies where maybe the picture is not entirely clear just yet. But hydro is certainly one of the pieces, hydropower. Hydrogen can also play a big role, right? Let's see where our gas infrastructure that we're having right now will lead us. I think it has been up for discussions, or it has been in the media quite prominently over the past couple of months, that we're actually having gas storage. Yeah, so maybe we can change some of the gas storage to actually retrofit it to hydrogen storage. There are things like gravity storage happening, compressed air storage. I think there's a wide array of technologies out there right now that can help us solving the seasonality problem. And I think what's also important is to check what exactly the seasonality problem actually is in each of the geographies that we're looking at. Because, for example, if you look into the generation profiles of Germany, I just checked that a couple of days ago, it's actually interesting to see that the lowest renewable production we have in summer. So in Germany, from a generation perspective, we don't have too little generation. We have to balance it then with the demand. Yeah, that might change the picture a bit. But actually, we have peak production in winter because the wind share is so high. And in summer, the wind share is relatively low, but the additional PV can't make up for this. And this will obviously change from country to country. But I think that's one component that's very important to look at, how we can balance those things out and how we can kind of find the tailor-made solution for the respective country that we're in, and then maybe even do some cross-border things, as we are, for example, doing with Norway.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned gas there. We actually have a graphic that shows how gas and renewables actually complement each other. And Jochen, do we need gas as a backup, or can we use flexibility measures that overcome that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think we were counting on gas since a long time. So that was always the bridge technology, which Germany and Europe was counting on. So investing into gas because we want to phase out, first of all, nuclear, and second, coal power plants. And now we come to the next biggest problem we have actually is right now that we do not have any gas any longer. So, or at least not enough to fill this gap right now. But anyways, yes, I do believe we need kind of something which is, let's say, bridging the gap or fill the gaps of the intermittency of the renewable energy assets. So big question is how can we count on the gas? I think yes, we're gonna do this, and we still need to rely a little bit on gas, and then let's say next to it, hydrogen is coming then. So every gas power plant will be now, which is now a new one or will be installed, is kind of hydrogen or should be hydrogen ready. And I think that is then the next step, that we gonna switch from gas to hydrogen. And yes, I think still we need kind of these technologies, yes.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, recently Greece relied on renewables only for 5 hours. Why is this significant? What can we learn from this? And how can we make it last for longer?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think in general, Greece is a great example that we are actually able to achieve a system based on 100% renewable energy sources. But actually, I can only agree with the previous speakers that what we need to make it last longer is definitely more flexibility in the system. So, for example, electricity storages and also DSM more in the future. I think at the moment DSM is a little bit not there right now. For example, regarding the distribution level, the household appliances are currently not ready. They don't have the technical equipment to actually react to market prices. So there we are not quite there. But of course, the importance of flexibility increases with the growing share of renewables. And I mean, the German government has just tightened the targets for electricity. So now we aim at a share of 80% renewables in the electricity generation by 2030. And in this context, we definitely also need to think about the role of natural gas in the future. Jochen, you already mentioned this, I think, because we are always considered natural gas to be the bridging technology, but now we need to incentivize flexibility measures much earlier than we previously thought. And I think to use the full flexibility potentials, we need to find solutions for regulatory and also technical issues. And when speaking about the technical issues, I'm not even speaking only about hardware and software, but also actually about the skilled workers who are able to handle all of the data and to work with the software. I think this is a big problem that we are not speaking about enough at the moment. So so basically what we need is definitely the expansion of renewable energy sources and then also flexibility measures. And to expand those, we need the appropriate regulation, we need to have the technical solutions, and we need the skilled workers to handle the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot to cover there. Christoph, you were nodding a lot to some of those points. Did you want to add something?
No, I fully agree. I think flexibility certainly is going to be a key topic, and that's why also we as a company will start investing heavily into battery storage, a grid scale battery storage, which I think will be a key piece of the puzzle for the next years to come of the energy transition, because just the build out of the grid takes so much longer and way too long and is so costly. So, and we need solutions now in the short term, and that's why flexibility solutions like such as battery storage will become more important in the future.
And obviously we need to really scale up PV and wind as well. What's kind of holding us back from that, and how can we accelerate that?
Yeah, I think there are a few areas, but to highlight maybe 2 or 3. So I think the permitting processes are still too tedious in many regions. So one example to make it more tangible: in the UK, we're looking at a project now which is really basically ready. We're just waiting for one committee to give the final tick. And we've been put on the agenda, it will happen in the next 2 weeks. And then we got pulled again from the agenda because some other urgent topic came up. And this has been going on like this since months. Okay. So if you talk about, what would help accelerate the build out, it's really, I think, more streamlined permitting processes. This is something I think we really, really need in many countries. Yeah. Then other topics like I think space in Europe, of course, we have less large tracts of lands like in other regions. So we need to think about more creative solutions, not just big PV parks, big wind parks, more like also in densely populated areas. So one topic I find super exciting is community solar, building PV on rooftops in densely populated areas, sharing the electricity and not just doing it on individual houses. Yeah. And then I think another key issue these days is the supply chain, right? We are facing a lot of delays, in various areas, and just too dependent on China. And I think global production needs to ramp up, which also means I think more and more in Europe. Let's see if we can be competitive, but still I think global production needs to ramp up to not really be on the or pull down the acceleration of the energy transition. I think we just need more capacities.
Yeah. And Jean-Baptiste, do you experience those supply chain challenges at BP?
I think we have them too. Yeah, I think we have a light source PP is typically a building large scale PV park across the globe. And I think when I discuss with the colleagues, I think we are experiencing those challenges too. Or for our EV charging network, yeah, you need plenty of DCs that comes from all over the globe. And yes, we do experience those challenges. There are still ways, and maybe one point also to add on that, I think that the solution, I agree with the solution that have been proposed yet, and it's the technological solutions, part of the supply chain problems that have just been mentioned, they are there today. Yeah, I don't think we need to wait for, something that we will discover in a couple of years. And if this comes, that's super. But there is a lot of things we can do today, despite supply chain challenges or let's say regulatory hurdles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Stefan, how can large scale and small scale assets complement each other? The new decentralized system will have to have both and balance both. And as we've talked about, use a lot of flexibility measures to have both of those. And how would you kind of envision this balance in the future?
Happy to jump onto that in 1 second. Maybe just one point to add very briefly to the question before, what's hampering the rollout. I think Chris was very much on point with regards to the permitting processes, but I think actually the regulatory hurdles go even further than this, because we, for example, also have a big workforce problem, right? And if we want to build enough, and that would assume we have enough land, we have enough resources, and we get the permitting done, which are 3 big ifs. But even if we have this, then we still need to have the people who would actually deploy it and install it. And I think this is also one of the problems that we're facing right now. And in Germany, for example, we are requiring always to have certified electricians putting things out, which, in principle makes sense. But on the other hand, to become a certified electrician takes some 3 years or so. And if we really want to scale up the build out, I think this is also one of the topics that is frequently overlooked. I just heard about it a couple of weeks ago, and that was very surprising to me, because so far I've always only thought about, hey, we need to get the permitting done and we need to build out the grids, but it really gets down to, do we have enough people to actually connect everything that we have to connect in the upcoming years? So this is just one interesting point that I heard that I briefly wanted to add to the question that you raised, in a sense of how can large and small scale assets complement each other? And I would assume especially Jochen can add a lot to that question, because I think it's very much a VPP question in the end. But I think that is indeed more or less the answer eventually, right? I think what we have to do is that we find every kilowatt hour, kind of, and I'm deliberately not using megawatt hours, but kilowatt hours of flexibility that we have in the system, and leverage that to the fullest extent. And I think what we do with large asset like standalone grid scale storage is that we integrate with the market directly, and we try to basically support the macro movements. But I think if we move towards a really intelligent system, we should also use the small flexibilities that we would see behind the meter, do some behind the meter optimization, and then also ideally aggregate the small capacities up into virtual power plants, so they can actually move the needle on the market in the bigger scale as well. And obviously, I don't want to rant on regulation the entire time, but I think right now, and I think this is something that Jochen indeed knows much better than me. I think right now, getting small assets deployed into the system and integrated into the system is still very tricky from a regulatory perspective. And if I just hear the stories of my parents trying to hook up solar panels on their roof and then basically having to register a business in order to get tax credits and so on, I'm not sure if that is the kind of simpleness kind of that we need on this regard. Yeah, but I think here we can push a bit more to try to get every kilowatt hour flexibility into the system, and then it needs to be optimized accordingly.
Jochen, what would you add to that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Steffen, to highlight this. Yeah, first of all, I totally agree. So since we are working on this since now more than 10 years to integrate small scale assets into the system, and still there are a lot of hurdles to do so. I'm a bit fearing that we talk a little bit too much about economic redistribution at these days. This is happening at the COP, for instance. This is happening at the so-called Strompreisbremse, so the break of power prices and gas prices. And not too much talking about, or not too much focus on, let's say, the real challenge which we are facing, the real problem, let's say, the key of the or this seed of the problem, which is that we're gonna need more renewables in the field, and that we need to have more flexibility to manage all these intermittent capacities. And this is what I'm a little bit fearing. And here it's again also regulation, right? So in the last, let's say, decade, we were talking a lot about phase out of coal, and I think the last 4 years of the last government was just facing on this one, on coal phase out, and there was blocking all the needed nitty-gritty stuff which is needed in the regulation. So an innovative change of the energy system needs an innovative regulation, because we are heavily regulated, and this is needed also in the power system. At the same time, yeah, to make innovation possible, but we need also then have regulation which is, let's say, at the same speed as, let's say, all these wonderful startups which we have here on the table, for instance. And so I think, yeah, governments and regulators need to do their homework, and I'm fearing that we're losing too much time on redistribution discussions right now, as we used to have the same focus on discussions on the phase out of coal. We have some homework which we need to do.
And Lisa, we've been talking a lot about regulation, and you work quite closely with policy. Can you give us any concrete sort of examples of how regulation should be improved to reduce the hurdles that we've been talking about?
I mean, I don't have the perfect solution here yet, but I can speak about one major problem, and this is regarding the prosumer storage contribution. So if you have a household, for example, that has a battery storage and the solar PV on the roof, the storage faces both regulatory and technical issues, because at the moment the grid operator in most cases has no data about the filling level of the storage and cannot say how the storage is used. So if the prosumer, for example, is just using the electricity directly, or whether it's first stored and then used, so on and so on. And it's also not, the grid operator is also not able to operate it. And I mean, from the grid operator perspective, it would be much better if this home storage could be used as one flexibility option for the grid, because if a lot of people have it, it's just like a big flexibility option. And at the same time, the prosumer faces the regulatory issue that the remuneration for feeding in renewable electricity, usually, which is stored in the battery storage and then fed into the grid, and then you would normally receive the remuneration. You as a prosumer, you cannot receive this remuneration anymore once you start to charge electricity from the public grid, because it does not count as renewable electricity then anymore. And this is, I think, a huge problem, because I think prosumers will be a major actor when we are looking into further expanding renewable energy sources, and especially self-consumption. And I think we somehow should first make it possible for the grid operator to get the data from the storage, and then also use the storage as a flexibility tool for the grid. And then also, I think we need to find some new solution for the remuneration for the renewable electricity, because I don't think that this should be somehow in the way of either using as a flexibility tool or to receive the remuneration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Lisa. We've had a question from the audience asking, do you see supply chain issues subsiding in the future? Christoph, what's your view on that, and why not?
Unfortunately, I don't think this will subside in the short term. There are just a few, fundamental problems we're facing. So yeah, I think we just need to, we don't have, the capacities to build or to get as much raw materials as we need. We're too dependent on China. There, a lot of delays in transportation, all these things, it will take time to ramp up. And we have a few bottlenecks I think we need to overcome also with innovation. And these things won't happen that quickly. Unfortunately, it's my view.
Yeah. Jean-Baptiste, would you like to add anything to that?
I don't have specific information on that, but I tend to share the opinion.
Yeah.
I do not have any specific information on that, if I might jump in here, sorry. But I'm just thinking Europe is just having such high electricity prices right now that this should attract so much PV panels right now. So we should attract, let's say, all the production of the world right now. And I just cannot imagine that this cannot be overcome by, let's say, supply chain issues right now. So with these high electricity prices, I see just so much PV coming into the system, which I would expect, of course, that is, let's say, there will be some operational hustle for sure. But let's say from top down, I would just, let's say, think economic wise and think with these higher energy prices, we're gonna have a lot of PV in the future.
Yeah, and we're also seeing, Jochen, with gas prices going crazy, the Repower EU packet with higher targets of PV, of EVs and everything like that. How do you think we can kind of match those increased targets with actually delivering the goods?
Yeah, I do not have, let's say, any inside view on, let's say, on the supply chain. So I just see very high electricity prices, which, let's say, it goes in the same direction as the high goals which we are having from renewable energy assets or renewable energy goals. And so I think we're gonna have a lot of PV installation in the near future. For sure, let's say we have some issues, COVID still and supply chain issues. This might still last a year, but if we talk about 2030, I would expect that we're gonna have these PV, which we expect installed in Europe, and then we just need to think about how to integrate these. So I would expect we're going to have huge installation of PV in the next years in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, Jochen, by the way, on the long-term perspective. I think the world is very good in solving if there are problems, and then it has to be solved to find a solution eventually. But in the short to medium term, I just looking at the lead time of certain components. It's sometimes for certain components you have to wait 12 or 24 months. This just points to the fact that it won't go away very quickly. But long term, I fully agree.
And Lisa, you wanted to add something to that?
Yes, actually, I wanted to jump into the high electricity prices because I would like to believe you that we will have a lot of solar PV expansion in the next years. But personally, I'm a little bit afraid that with the electricity price cap, for example, there's also a lot of insecurity at the moment, especially when we're looking into the proposal of the government to make it, I think from September on, I think the latest proposal was to the price cap. And also, if we're looking into the tenders at the moment, it's maybe the offers are maybe just fill half of the total capacity which is in the tenders at the moment. So I don't know. I would like to believe you, but I don't see this development at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe let's say the actual tenders which are out there are still, let's say, reflecting the issues which we have on the supply chain. And I would not expect, so the latest update we have had, or we just saw today on the price caps for electricity and the redistribution of the earnings. And I think, yes, that creates, and I do not like this, this is always creating, I'm not sure if this is creating any more added value than chaos. But in the, let's say, also here in, let's say, this is an issue for the next year, but not for, let's say, all our overall goal up to 2030. So my fear is then in 2030, let's say the outcome of PV will be almost zero. So the value of an added kilowatt hour of PV would be, in the first step, first of all, almost zero, because with, let's say, PV, more and more PV added production or generation out of PV, we would in the first place do not have any added value. This kilowatt hour does not create any added value to the market, because we just have enough of this. We can look into, let's say, a good example for this is Australia. Here we see PV curves which are going up, and then at 11 o'clock we just have a flat kind of a base load delivery of PV, and then at at 3 o'clock p.m. it's going down again, and the peak is totally just switched off because we cannot integrate this PV plant, this PV power into the power grid. And this is also what I'm expecting will, in the first place, happen in Europe, and first of all maybe in Germany. And then, of course, it's about innovation, storages to switch this power into the hours where we need it.
Yeah, it's exactly what I wanted to ask Steffen. Obviously, storage plays a really important role here, where we need to make use of every bit of renewable power we can get, and a lot is going to waste because we can't handle it in those peak times. How can we kind of better balance peak and non-peak hours?
Actually, I think so. That's a perfect question, but I think Jochen basically gave 95% of the answer already. I think that's exactly how you do it, right? What we basically want to do is that we get to a system where we have as much renewables in there as we can, kind of, but of course we still want to make this efficient, so we should also not excessively overbuild. And then, in the end, you basically try to match. It sounds very simple. From a tech perspective, it's a bit more difficult, but in the end, we just have to make sure that we match demand and supply, and ideally we manage to flexibilize things on both ends. And then we bring it together. I think ideally, if we are smart, we also make sure that we are trying to avoid bottlenecks that we can avoid. Yeah. So, for example, I think co-location of renewables and storage is a very good idea, because in some countries, in Germany, it's to a certain extent a problem. In the UK, in the Netherlands, I think those problems are more severe. There, the grid connection is one of the key bottlenecks that you face in the very first place. So what we actually have to do is that we already couple those assets behind the meter, so we don't add additional congestion to the grid. And then we can basically balance this out behind the meter, kind of, and then make sure that we have a nice and smooth supply into the energy system. Of course, it's a bit simplified speaking, but I think that's the direction in which we should be headed eventually.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, on top of increasing renewable capacity, we also need to drop fossil fuels. And we're seeing, I think in the IEA's World Energy Outlook, they showed that because gas is dropping, that coal is kind of making up for that and spiking a little bit in the next few years. Jean-Baptiste, do you think that is a necessary measure in the short term? And do you think we can kind of bring down all fossil fuels within the necessary timescale?
I think we have to. And honestly, I'm probably the last person saying that coal is the solution. So I think the solution have been presented by Jochen, Steffen, and the other panelists. I think it's let's try sector coupling. Yeah, is a large part of the answers. We will have ultimately a lot of renewable production. So if you can multiply the use cases for this electricity production, because you aggregate at the home level, because you install an EV charger, you're charging your EV directly with the power you've produced. Maybe you have a battery, as my former colleagues from Sonnen are doing, and actually with Next Kraftwerke, and you optimize the PV production because you're charging your EV. For heating, you have a heat pump in your home if it's feasible, and you do load shifting on top of that, and then that's much better solution in my mind. And this is at the household level. You can do that, and it was mentioned by Steffen on the large scale PV park with co-location with renewable, with let's say energy hubs. Yeah, we were talking about hydrogen. Yeah, so if you want to produce hydrogen, green hydrogen, you need large renewable facilities, maybe an offshore wind park nearby. You will produce with an electrolyzer if you want to produce hydrogen. So if you want to run your electrolyzer in a very efficient manner, you need a flat electricity profile. If you want to do that, maybe you have your offshore wind park, you have a large-scale PV park on the other side, and you have a battery in the middle to be able to supply, when needed, the flat electricity profile for your electrolyzer. And I think these are the solutions that we want to promote, not a renewal of coal.
Mm-hmm. And we just had a question from the audience. Lisa, have you seen an energy transition plan that you really liked that incorporates some of the ideas that we're exploring?
An energy transition plan, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the EU already has introduced some regulations which are improving, for example, the shared energy consumption, for example, the definition of energy communities. And I think something like this is already it's already the first steps, and I think we should definitely try to implement this in the national energy policies as soon as possible.
I fully agree with this one. If I may jump in, this is, I think, can be a really, really powerful thing, promoting energy communities and actually putting a less strain on the grid, because more is done on a more local level and done through a distribution network in densely populated areas. So yeah, fully agree. This can be a very, very important step in the right direction. And
Stefan, you wanted to add something too?
Yeah, I think we had those 20 minutes about regulatory ranting, and I think on many things we were probably not entirely off, but I think at the same time we should also be appreciative of the amount of activity that is ongoing there, because I think the regulator is actually pushing. They have been pushing for a number of years, and I think some of the measures that we have been seeing actually helped us getting to the state that we are at. And for example, Chris can probably say a bit more about that, to which extent fixed feed-in tariffs and so on actually reduced the investment risk and therefore supported the renewable build-out and so on. I think what's currently happening is that we're moving into an entirely different nature of an energy system. And at the same time, we can't just say, okay, let's now switch it off for 4 or 5 years, and then we come up with the perfect plan, and then we basically roll this one out. I think it's so complex that actually all of us, we kind of have to support this, because I actually think that many measures that are being introduced are coming from the right motivations. I hope, at least. Sometimes it's maybe lobbying or ill-informed decisions. But if you were, for example, to talk about the co-location cases, there are subsidy schemes set out by the regulator that are actually supporting the build out of batteries. And, I'm always talking about batteries, obviously. And I think to 90%, this is a good scheme again, but then the one thing that's not working in the scheme is that you can't import electricity from the grid because of some piece of the regulation, which then kind of reduces the overall value of that given site. Yeah, but I don't think that this is necessarily an ill-informed decision, but it's coming a bit from the legacy system, where probably at some point someone said a renewable site is a site where green electricity is being exported, and I must not import something that is not green, which probably a couple of years ago made sense. But in the system that we are moving towards, it doesn't make sense anymore. But I think expecting that the regulator knows all these bits and pieces of this, and at the same time we want to have lean ministries and so on, and they shall be fast, we also have to allow them to sometimes do mistakes, and we have to help them not to make them, and do that together with them.
Lisa, did you want to make a point there?
Actually, I would like to add something to the regulation, because previously I mentioned that, of course, the regulation is really important, but also the technical equipment, because right now, I don't know, the smart meter is a big topic in Germany, and I think, we more or less failed the first try to roll out smart meter, and now there's a second or a restart, let's say, of smart meter rollout. And I think this, to actually use the full flexibility potential, for example, of a prosumer storage, as I said before, we need the technical equipment to read all of the data, and then again people to handle the data. So then I think the regulation and the technical equipment goes hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. And Christoph, did you want to add anything about Stefan's point on feed-in tariffs?
I agree that regulation was helpful in many instances. But actually, what I wanted to add is also, since a positive side on regulation, actually, what a very powerful thing that has happened in terms of regulation was the indirect effects, the regulation on investors. I think this is something that helped tremendously. There are a lot of good things happening, like the EU taxonomy and things like this, which we personally have, as in our company, have experienced as a positive thing. For instance, earlier this year we did a green loan instrument, and we attracted a lot of interest from big institutional investors because it was a green loan, and otherwise we probably wouldn't have been able to do it that well. And that certainly helped. So also I think the regulation on the investor side is actually something where a lot of things have happened and can be quite powerful.
Nice to hear the positive side of regulation. Yeah, Jochen, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, first of all, I also agree. It's not fair to rant always on regulation. So they are having also a tough job, right? And they're also going into the right direction often, always, not but often. And it's, let's say, our goal also in such kind of discussion to support the good decisions and to give with that input for the next good decisions, right? And this is why it seems so that we are often complaining about this, but it's, let's say, in the end, hints to do something better, right? But what I wanted actually to add is to Lisa's point on smart meters. Exactly. So this is really what we need in the end to give the incentive to the prosumers, to not only prosumers, everyone is talking about prosumers, but also just consumers, because prosumers in the end are kind of already incentivized in a good way. Yes, it's going in the right direction. But here I want to just make one point, that I just want to have equal rights between full in-feed and co-located assets. And we have still the problem, and we're going to face more of, or we'll have just more of this problem with more penetration of renewable energies, that we have, let's say, the so-called household or the house owners, which have the possibility to build their PV plant. They can just make use in these times also of cheap electricity and just buy the rest of the electricity cheap from the grid, which is not fully fair, because you'd still have the grid use and things like that. So it's a deep dive topic, so to say. But I would just want to make, let's say, make the point here: equal rights for full in-feed and for co-located assets on household level, but also, let's say, on grid scale level, makes just economically sense. And here, I think to work on an improvement also, again, on regulation would make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for a really valid point there, Jochen. We've had a question from the audience, from Leopold, who wants us to go a little bit deeper. He's not satisfied with all of the things that we've covered yet. He said, regulatory issues aside, how can 100% renewable work if we have a period with many dark days and low wind? Apart from deploying a more smart, flexible grid, grid level battery storage and hydrogen plants, is that really enough? Jean-Baptiste, do you want to try and answer the difficult question?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question. Yeah, and I think there is not one answer, because it will depend where you are, and we're talking a lot about Germany. The BP, we need to have a little bit broader view, and I think sometimes when we address the point about long duration energy storage, yeah, the answer is multiple, and there is not one. Sometimes I was amazed that my team came back recently on there is a big council and the UK government, and everybody is talking about it. Consultancy with a blue label is coordinating all that, and we have plenty of answers. Yeah, and then the team came back with cavern and speicher. Yeah, like compressed air storage. And I remember my first day as a trader at E.ON when we were managing the Unsdorf power plant. So it's not a new solution. And if you happen to have a cavern where you can store air, that's a good solution. But if you don't have it, because you don't have the resources, there is no salt cavern near where you are, you need to find another place. It could be geothermal, it can be new technologies on the battery space, maybe with sodium, that will extend a little bit the duration of the storage. So there will be multiple answers to that. Yeah, and we need to invest in this space a little bit more. Yeah, so I agree. This is not fully solved. Yeah, but let's start doing what we can do today with more wind, more renewable, demand side management, battery, lithium-ion is a major technology, and then peu à peu investigate and find the solution that are appropriate to every country's journey.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that, Christoph?
I mean, 100% renewable. I think one topic we haven't been discussing so far is, I mean, carbon capture. Mm-hmm. So I think there will be, as for these particularly dark days in the winter time, you know, we it might take a very long time to replace those or to have 100% renewable on those days. But you know, combining it with carbon capture might be the way forward for these situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jochen, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you. I think hydrogen could be the answer. So in so-called Dunkelflaute, of course, I would not believe that batteries are helping us out a lot, and also demand-side management not too much, and all the virtual power plants not. But we need something which is delivering for some weeks then in times where you do not have any wind and solar generation. And I think for this, chemical stored energy is the answer, and this can be then hydrogen. And so yes, 100% renewable from my perspective is possible. Challenging, not, let's say, the first goal to have 100%, maybe 80% is a good goal for the first step. And then I think it's also good, let's say, to learn on the way and improve the solution. So we, as Steffen just said, we are not now planning the 100% solution, but we are going step by step, peu à peu. And yeah, so then 100% renewable is possible, and soon, by the way, yes.
Soon? Should we talk timescales? When do you think we can actually reach that?
So I would say 2030, 100% would be possible in power for Germany.
Okay. Does anyone else have a different idea?
I think I don't have a better answer, but I think what's important is that you said 100% in power in Germany, and then I think we have to see how fast we manage to actually move everything to power and electricity, right? I think that's the part that will be tricky, that we really want to entirely electrify, heating industry, mobility industry, and so on and so forth. I think it's actually super cool that we're kind of starting to then agree on a common denominator, and that we say, okay, the entire system runs on power, and then we can only focus on getting power and electricity green. But I think that part of the transition that will actually take quite a bit, because there's also lots of legacy infrastructure and hardware out there that will take very long to replace. And if we just look at cars, we still sell combustion powered cars, and the average lifetime of a car is 7 years. So those cars, they will still be on the streets in 2030, even if we were to by then have a fully green power mix. Those cars, they will still somehow consume fuel, and they will still be there. And I think there we also have to be kind of wary of the resources that we have, because it might not make too much sense to throw everything away, especially the things that are efficient today. There's one example that I want to give on this. I'm not sure if it really answers the question, but to a certain extent, but actually I think it's helpful to think about that too, because if we also postpone too many investments for too long, we might actually hurt the system right now. And I think there was one example that I've heard of aircrafts, where you have the choice now between having a very old aircraft still out there that is right now just very harmful for the environment, and then waiting that you at some point can hopefully replace it with something that is running on green power, or replacing it today and it being much more fuel efficient and much better in filtering CO2 out. It might be the better choice to actually still make those investments, but then to also say, the lifetime of an aircraft is more than 7 years. So that's, I think, one of those things that we have to keep in mind. There's not this one silver bullet, and I'm not too much of a fan of just saying, here's the cutoff point, and as of then we do everything differently. But I think we have to take a smart choice and look really at the lifetime perspective of certain assets that we're working with.
Yeah. And when we're talking about power mix, obviously electrification of mobility, heating, transport, aviation, and everything brings even bigger challenges alongside that. Jean-Baptiste, you've talked a lot about sector coupling. What sort of other challenges do we have to decarbonize all of those other kind of industries along the way?
Yeah, and I think Jochen mentioned it on the power side. I think we good on the way, but there are sectors that are harder to decarbonize. And you mentioned heating, you mentioned aviation. And here, once more, there is not one silver bullet, but there will be multiple solutions. And then the start is, in my opinion, always try to be more efficient. You take aviation, you can fly less. Yeah, so it's not always easy to apply. I managed to come with a Eurostar to London on Monday, but it's it doesn't always work. We can consume less, be more efficient. Yeah, be more efficient. It's valid for both. Steffen mentioned more efficient airplanes. It can be better insulated homes. It can be adding a smart thermostat, and I think Christian from Tado was on another panel. Yeah, where you can always, maybe it will not remove the full CO2 footprint, but just every step counts. This would be the first step, being more efficient. electrify where it works. Yeah, so for heating, heat pumps is the obvious answer. It doesn't work everywhere. I have in the south of Paris an old house heat pump. I've already asked. It's complicated, so to say. But everywhere where this goes, and for new builds, it should be the obvious answer. It could be also for the aviation. I mean, for short distance, so flight taxis could be electrified. Long distance, it becomes more complicated, but there are also solutions here. Yeah, for aviation is sustainable aviation fuel. So it works today. Are they enough? No. Is that cheap enough? No. But I think at BP, with BP, was investing quite a lot in this segment to make it more efficient, and you could just fuel your plane with let's say renewable fuel, so to say. Yeah, it could be in the heating segment, district heating. Yeah, wherever it works, it's also a very efficient way. And I mean, we mentioned it already. Hydrogen is for filling those gaps. Can be. I mean, there are probably industries that are even harder to decarbonize. You can say steel or cement production, where hydrogen will be a large part of the answer. Yeah. So I think this is multiple answers, but I'm confident we'll find answers to all those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we have a question from the audience from Marcus. He asked, can we achieve 100% renewables with the current market structure? Having a free market on one side, but also a heavily regulated sector relying on government incentives and development targets? Or does energy need to become a fully regulated commodity? Lisa, would you be able to provide some insight on that?
Yes, I mean, the market design is also a hot topic at the moment, especially when looking into the electricity prices. And what we need to think about is that in the future, when we have more renewable energy sources, the electricity price with the current market design will be really low. And I think that we should not stop paying for the actual generated electricity, but for the capacity, especially for example, if we have the hydrogen power plants for the gaps, we need to pay for the capacity that is available in times of when we have no wind and no solar, so that it's actually still economically beneficial for them to operate in those times.
Thanks, Lisa.
If I may add, it's let's say a hot topic, right? And I'm always fearing that once we have high prices, politicians come to in place and say, "Hey, the prices are too high. We need to do something." We have this discussion in Germany right now. In whole Europe, we have this discussion. And actually, these high prices is needed for reinvesting and the money and actually also for amortization of the asset itself. So this is a bit the fear why, Lisa, you could be right, that we, let's say, need kind of in the future a market for incentives to invest, just capacity. In general, I believe this market could work itself without this. So if, let's say, politicians stay calm and if everyone would, let's say, step back from the market, I would be really sure that we would have the right incentives with the prices we get. So we just had this example of PV, too much PV installed. So what is then happening? The price for just the generated PV is going down, and maybe there's a better price to be for a PPA for wind assets. So it's just worth it to install another wind asset. And that's the right allocation for the market. And then it worth it more to invest into a storage at the same time, which is the right allocation. So we just get from the market the right signals. And this is the price to allocate the investment into the right assets. And I would believe the energy-only market itself provides the perfect, let's say, incentives as long as we just let the market be in the long run. But if we are fearing, and what is right now happening is that just politicians are jumping in and say, hey, prices are too high, we cap it. And then, of course, in the next step, investors, as you maybe, are just stepping back and say, I do not know if I really can count on high prices in the long run, because once we have high prices, politicians are just cutting it, and I'm not getting my payback. And so, yeah, so if we believe still that politicians will do that, we at the same time will need this capacity market. But in general, from an economic point of view, I would say energy markets are better.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, you wanted to comment back on that?
Yes, exactly. Because I mean, in general, I agree with you, and I think in theory this sounds really nice. But I think let's put it like this: as a backup in the case of emergency, I think we still need some other asset, some other source which we can rely on, something like hydrogen power plants. And if this power plant will only be used, I don't know, in 2 days during the winter, I don't think I don't see any economic benefit for them. So why would anybody build such a plant, even though if in those two days we will need it? So yeah, this is a little bit my fear.
And Stefan?
Just shortly on this, Next Kraftwerke's business model was relying on some days per year payback for energy price in the capacity, so in the ancillary service market. If the prices are very high, it's worth it, and it's worth it to invest in, and just having a day per year payback, and when the price is high enough, no problem. Sorry.
No, I actually think that we are somehow on the same page actually on this one, because I think in the end, I think well, you tell me, but that's my understanding, right? I think the market mechanisms in principle work, and I think that's actually also what we have seen over the past couple of months. And I'm getting a bit frustrated kind of with the fact that, you know, we have had the super high power prices or energy prices over the summer, and now they're actually going down, and now we are starting to introduce price caps, but the market has found its new equilibrium kind of. And I think it's okay even to have the redistribution discussion, but please, let's not mess with the market mechanism in the first place. Let's try to find a way to then distribute afterwards. But the mechanism in itself works, and it's setting the right incentives, because we just spoke about the way that we have to flexibilize the system, but I need to have some coordinating force, and I have a very hard time thinking of another mechanism that will actually provide this coordination force if it's not a market-based pricing mechanism. So I think it's okay to think about how to adjust the regulation and to maybe regulate certain parts heavier, maybe work with some capacity prices to incentivize certain investments. But I do not think that we have to basically transform the entire system and, you know, go to centrally planned energy system. For this, it's becoming that's the direction in which we're heading. We're heading into a decentral energy system. So making this one trying to control with a centrally regulated scheme, I think is, you know, in any perspective set up for failure.
Thanks, Stefan. We've basically run out of time, but just quickly want to ask Christoph about the investment, the incentives to invest. Do we need incentives, or are the benefits already there?
Yeah, I mean, renewable production in many cases is the cheapest way to produce electricity. So I think fundamentally the technologies are there, and but still, of course, support helps and incentives help. But I mentioned earlier, you know, I think incentives for investors actually are something that I find very, very useful to channel money where it can actually be deployed. Yeah, that's my take.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much to everyone who's joined. Really hot discussion there. I think there's no doubt that we can reach 100%, and we will reach it. A lot of ways, a lot of things we need to combine to get there. But yeah, I think hopeful that we can definitely get there. Thank you all for your time and your insights. And we'll be back in 2 minutes talking about end-to-end integration along the energy value chain.